undisputed king of stars.
To a man who needs no introduction, but I'll give a long introduction anyway. No. Everybody knows Ed Morrissey. If you've been on the internet at all, I started reading him. There was this thing called the Northern Alliance. And there's all these great bloggers, including the good folks at Powerline and Captain's Quarters. And that was Ed's thing. He basically shook the pillars of Canada with his reporting there. And then right at the beginning of Hot Air, he was there on the spot. He's still there, been wildly successful. Ed Morrissey, how the heck are you?
I am the heck fine. How the heck are you?
Again, excuse the language on the show. This is rated PG-13. I said darn before we started, so things are going very well here. How have things changed internet-wise? Because you were kind of there near the start. I said right before we started recording that I had talked to James Lilacs recently, and we were talking about the woes of dial-up and the old fellow sitting around the Cracker Barrel trading stories of, I don't know which modem we started with. But how have things changed? Because it's kind of amazing to look back and think, wow, when all this started, the whole blogosphere with Instapundit and you and Lilacs and all these folks, there was no iPhone. There wasn't a pivot to video. It was pretty rudimentary, kind of more of a Wild West, and it was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. It was before, it was kind of before the success. I mean, we can talk about corporatization of the blogosphere, but that's actually a success story. I mean, we started making money at it, and it became a market of itself, which is, I think, one of the most interesting grassroots creation of a marketplace, certainly in my lifetime, and maybe, in history, the creation of a market for commentary, and grassroots and completely democratized in the beginning, right?
Right.
Because the cost of publication was almost zero, and you didn't have print limitations, you didn't have editorial limitations, and everybody could do it. And for a while, everybody was doing it, but the people who weren't really into it quickly fell to the side. The people who weren't very good at it quickly fell to the side. And I think what was left were people who were committed to it, who had talent for it. And that would be all sorts of different people, Glenn Reynolds, Mickey Kaus, who is really sort of the father of blogging, Mickey Kaus.
Yeah. And vlogging, I would have to say. Too.
And vlogging. Yeah, you're right. Exactly. Yeah. He was a pioneer in a lot of ways. I kind of came, I was kind of considered that I came a little late, because I came in 2003 when, Glenn Reynolds had been up and running for a couple of years. And the first blog I ever remember reading was Asparagirl. I'm not ever sure what actually ever happened to her. I hope she's doing well, and I hope that she's enjoying whatever it is that she's doing, because she had a pretty nice blog, and it was in the days after 9/11, and she had some really interesting insights to give. But it was very, like you said, sort of Wild West-ish, right? There were no rules. We didn't even really have a code, like a code of ethics, like you'll see now, where we've kind of adopted the ethics of corrections, the ethics of that type of thing. But there were practices, I think, from the very beginning that were very beneficial. We linked each other, we engaged each other. We, would sometimes debate each other. Jazz Shaw writes for Hot Air, but that started off with him and I on our own blogs, and his was Middle Earth Journal, which he shared with somebody. I forget the man's name, who was farther left. Jazz was sort of a centrist at the time, and the other guy was more of a progressive. I think he may have been based in Portland, and we started off arguing. Disagreeing with each other, and we would disagree back and forth, and we had such a good time doing that and writing back and forth. And when I had the opportunity to get him engaged at Hot Air, it just seemed like a really natural fit. And he kind of gradually made his way in as a guest poster, then as a sort of a weekend part-timer, and then became a full-time guy who's just been a stalwart over here at Hot Air. So I mean, we had all those we had those types of practices that developed into ethics. Always link, owes credit, that sort of thing. And we
Mhm.
really self-policed each other when people failed to do that. And I think that it made our arguments better because we'd have to link the
Mhm.
hard data, or we'd have to reveal who it was that we're getting the information from, and people could judge. And I think that's still true to this day.
Mhm.
Much more so, I think, John, than it is for the mainstream media, who posit these things without sometimes stealing them outright from bloggers, but mostly positing things without any sort of recognition of opposing viewpoints or anything else like that. I think that the blogosphere as it exists today is actually superior in terms of commentary
Mm.
than the mainstream media is.
Yeah. Well, I definitely post more, so that's been a huge boon to humanity that they
I
can read
agree.
my content. So, yeah, one thing too, the people who were flashes in the pan, and you still see this today on social media, those folks who fall into the outrage of the day type thing. They burn hot and burn bright and burn out pretty quickly. They would kind of
Yes.
rise and fall. And I remember seeing that in kind of the early days of just reading, and then when I kind of started writing here and there on the blog, it's just like, boy, that the outrage path will just destroy you ultimately. Obviously, there are outrageous things that you can get outraged about, but if you're 24/7, can you believe such and such politician said that? And oh my gosh, and how dare they? And 6 months of that, and you're like, I never want to see a computer. I never want to see a computer again because it just exhausts you. And so, kind of the slow and steady wins the race are the ones who really stuck around. And it's pretty fun to still be able to read them. I kind of started being a consumer of blogs, I would say, the year before 9/11, basically. And what really kicked it into gear was 9/11. But
Yep.
I just started reading people here and there. And then once that started, it was just a great alternative to kind of hash things out that would never get covered in the mainstream media. And so just the alternative voices were really important to a lot of people trying to figure out what the heck is going on here.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that I started off really, it wasn't really the blogosphere, but it was sort of semi-blogging, which was James Taranto's
Oh
Best of the Web
yeah,
at Wall Street
yeah,
Journal.
wonderful.
You know, when Toronto was doing that, or Taranto was doing that in
Mhm.
2000, I'll tell you when I picked up on it, it was around the Bush v. Gore election challenges. So
Right.
it was late 2000 when I started reading that, because his was actually a great roundup of all the different things that were being talked about in that dispute. And it got me in the habit of that sort of daily read thing. And that was, unlike most of the Wall Street Journal, that was free and in the clear. So you could read
Uh-huh.
that one without the subscription. Now I've since got a subscription to it, but I mean, and I kind of missed that. They still have the Best of the Web, but I don't think anybody's done it as well as Taranto did.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean,
He
he just has,
that was really one of a kind doing that. Now, I think a big thing that changed too was the advent of social media. Just
yeah,
kind of changed how you react to things, but it's also made it a lot easier to learn about new voices. You know, someone will come out of nowhere, just like in the early days of blogging, and you just think, oh my gosh, this woman is brilliant, or this kid's really got his head on straight pretty much. So that's been one improvement as well. Social media gets a lot of guff, understandably, but also too just being able to hear from new people, um, find out new angles. It's kind of what I like about reading things like Hot Air, and of course at Ricochet, where I am now, is hearing from people who don't live in DC, LA, Manhattan, the Bay Area, and you'll just hear a person saying, a good example is finding out about candidates. When everybody was rolling their eyes at Trump in 2015, hearing people saying, yeah, well, I'm talking to the guys. I'm building some buildings in Kansas City with a bunch of guys, and everybody's talking Trump. So just being able to hear the voice from people who are not speaking down to us is a great way to keep your ear to the ground and find out, okay, what are people actually talking about, and not just the approved agenda.
right. You know, I agree. And I think social media allowed for a lot more promotion. I do think though, it was a, what's the word? Yeah, I think it tended to replace, especially Facebook initially tended to replace a lot of blogging. And
Right.
then Facebook changed the rules, and everybody who was reliant on it suddenly found out the joys of self-publishing. Um,
Yeah.
right. I mean,
Yeah.
that was a mistake. I think a lot of people moved to that Facebook model.
Mhm.
And uh, so the to me, I think if we're looking at this, the social media has been kind of a mixed blessing for blogging. You know what I actually think is one of the best developments for blogging of late is
Mm.
Substack.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Now, Substack has the same issue that, if you're relying on Google or something like that, blogger.com is owned by Google now. Um, for a long time now, it's been owned by Google. Um, so to a certain extent, you're relying on a platform to publish. But so far, at least, Substack seems to be pretty hands off in
Mhm.
terms of content and allowing people to have their own say. I see Substack as a sort of a reversion back to really to blogger.com, where we had a platform where people could just open up their own things and generate subscriptions, get some revenue for their thing. And if they succeed really well, then they succeed really well. And if they don't, they don't. And I actually think Substack's a great development along those lines.
Yeah, it really is. And getting people to bring up really in-depth commentary as well, just kind of fleshing out an idea. One thing that I really liked, I think, from the start of blogging, and then it's continued with Substack is what I call intellectual prototyping. It's like, hey, I just got a crazy idea. I thought of this one thing, and the person just kind of meanders around the point they're trying to make, something new they're thinking of. Then people in the comments say, well, I disagree here, or I agree with this one. And it's like you can hone interesting ideas if you just present it to people with a little bit of humility and say, okay, I don't have the answer to this, but I've noticed this connection. And it's kind of fun to watch these ideas, people popping off each other, especially, I don't know, somebody in politics and someone in philosophy and someone who's into tech, kind of chatting together and figuring out, I don't know, what's the best way forward that we're doing. I think you just
Right.
get great discussions.
Yeah, no, I agree. And look, I mean, tech is something that's always going to enhance things.
Mm-hmm.
Back in it took me a long time to adopt video.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
When I mean, and I now almost half of what I do, maybe more than half of what I do, is
Mm-hmm.
video, podcasting. Um, and so, I've got my room set up for it. I built my office specifically for the whole idea of it. And I mean, 10 years ago, I was thinking, God, I don't want to do, I was doing the Ustream stuff, and I was like, that's good enough. I don't care.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, right.
it was like, yeah, this is just a sideline, right? This is just,
Uh-huh.
audience, stickiness sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing. Now it's a whole strategy, right? And we're using it for VIP content and all this kind of stuff. I'm also using it in the clear, with just the regular podcast stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoy it. And so because the technology's gotten easier to manage, it's also made it more attractive for people who are doing this on a more of a shoestring budget. Now I'm fortunate I work for a big company. They pay
Mm-hmm.
a lot of these bills for me, but still, that's the yeah. And as more of this technology keeps developing, I think you'll see more of it employed. But I think there's a certain limit to that too. I think it becomes a bells and whistles issue, and you still have to have good content. The tech doesn't
Right.
matter if the content stinks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's a lesson that we've learned in the blogosphere over and over again, with Facebook again, changing the rules in the middle of the stream sort of thing. The tech is great until it turns on you. You still
Mm-hmm.
have to have good content no matter what you do. And you should be publishing on your own if you can.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And it takes a lot of I don't know, kind of initiative to jump in there. One thing, I think you're the first person I saw who did this. I ended up kind of dipping my toes in it years later, but I remember we met at some conference in Texas. You had the blessed opportunity to hang out with me at night. I think what I did is everybody was rushing out to do karaoke or something, and you were sitting there having a drink or having a cigar, and I'm like, I want to hang out with Ed. I don't need to hang out with these youngins. with their karaoke machine. But just talking back then, I remember talking about, you had just started kind of incorporating on Sunday, talking about your faith. And that's something I thought was really good. And now I see a lot more conversation on that, because there's a lot more to life than politics, obviously. And it really does blend into, oh, hello, daughter. See, my daughter's walking by and she's trying to be very quiet and stealthy. So I want to talk all about her as she's walking by, because she's an introvert like her old man. But something that's been interesting is seeing people kind of incorporate real life as well into things. So what made you start doing that and slip away from mere, political commentary?
Well, I'll tell you, first off, I mean, even in the captain's quarters days, I was writing about oddball things, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was more of a personal blog. I was writing about more personal things,
Mm-hmm.
or I was writing more about personal things, I should say, in the captain's quarters days. And when I went to hot air, it's sort of like a, it's a different kind of platform. So I didn't write as much about personal things. I'll tell you what got me started on the Sunday reflections. Two different things. One was I got to talking with Dennis Prager one time about keeping the Sabbath. Of course, Dennis is Jewish, and so Sabbath is different day.
Wait, Dennis Prager is Jewish? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised. I was surprised. I was just as shocked as you are. I mean, and so he'd written about this, and he talked about it on his show, and I found his arguments to be very compelling, right? And that the Sabbath wasn't merely for, the Sabbath isn't even really for God. It's for you. It's for your own benefit, just like all the commandments are, right?
Right.
And so this is God's way of saying, this is how I love you. Please do this because you need this more than I do, right? Right. If I can rest on the seventh day, anybody can rest on the seventh day. Yeah. Dennis is making these really good arguments about that. I thought, I really need to try that just to get a balance on things. And I don't think I've even done that half as well as Dennis. Just like most things, Dennis does it extremely well. So I mean, I figure if I'm at 50% Prager, I'm doing pretty damn good.
Yeah, right.
Excuse the language on that, of course. The ironic language on that.
Right.
But the other thing too was on this is that I was going through a discernment process about becoming a deacon in the Catholic Church, which is it's a long process to do that.
Right.
Part of this is, doing discernment, and it's formal discernment. You're going through things, you're doing different things. And one of the processes of this discernment was going through your gifts, right? Gifts of the Holy Spirit. And this is talked about in Corinthians. It's talked about in other parts of the scripture that God gives you certain gifts, and those gifts are yours to use for your own benefit, but also should be for the benefit of, God, the church, whatever it is that you're doing. And I don't even think that this is necessarily even a New Testament thing. This is probably also in the Old Testament.
Right.
A while since I've looked at the theology on this, but anyway, it's specifically mentioned in the New Testament. And so I was doing like this inventory of my gifts, right, which is part of the process here. One of them was writing, right, and the other one was, other things. And I was thinking, I don't write a lot about religion, and when I do, it's usually still in a political context, right? What's happening in the church and this kind of stuff. And I had gone to the conclave. I think this is before I was going to before I went to the conclave in 2013. Might have been before that, actually. I might have started these at about the same time. And I was thinking that that maybe I should start doing this as a way of doing proclaim the gospel, right? Because this is a gift, and I have the gift to do this. So I actually asked, hey, does anybody mind if I do this? Because Hot Air is owned by Salem Communications, which is a great company. I love working.
Right.
I'm not saying that ironically or anything else. I have had almost a 20-year association now with Salem Communications in one way or another, not all of it as an employee. And it's been a great association, and it's been encompassed almost my entire blogging career in one way or another. And I've been working for them now for 13 years.
Right.
And so I came to them and asked them, does anybody have a problem with this? Because I'm Catholic and Salem is an evangelical Christian
Right.
broadcasting company. And my boss on the website said, nobody's going to have an issue with that. but we appreciate you asking, but nobody's going to have an issue with that. At the time, Alapundit was still working there. He was working there for, years after this too. And he says, it's atheist. Nobody's
right.
He writes about that. So what's the, I don't think anybody's got to, about the small theological difference between, Catholicism and evangelical. You don't need to worry about that. It's like, okay, great. And so, they were actually very supportive of this over the years too, because, we've had other conversations about this and they think it's great. So I decided to start doing this as two things. One is to try to produce something on Sunday that wasn't really work related, if I could get away with it,
Right.
and so honor the Sabbath. And the only work I'm doing is, God's work, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out to be, it's incredibly successful, not in terms of page views, because it doesn't get a ton of page views,
right.
Not everybody's interested in this type of thing. But I have to say that when I go out, and I haven't done this in a while because just the pandemic and everything else in life, I just haven't gone to, conferences of late. But whenever I've gone out in public and talked about, as a editor at Hot Air, now managing editor at Hot Air, the feedback that I most get is about the Sunday reflection, how much people appreciate it.
Oh, that's interesting.
And yeah, people will say other nice things because for the most part, people are very nice.
Right.
Even if they disagree with you, they'll just say, oh, well, I really like that one post you wrote that one time, and not saying, and I've hated everything else you've written ever since.
Right.
Just normally aren't like that. You've got trolls that are like that, but for the most part, people will try to be nice to you.
Yeah.
As to the, to an honest limit of their niceness. They're not gonna shower you with praise when they don't really like your stuff. So they'll just find, oh, that one time that you wrote about, tax policy, I really like that post.
Yeah.
But honestly, the thing I get the most feedback on is the Sunday reflections. And so, there are times when I'm like, I just want to mail this one in.
Right. Yeah.
I don't want to sit around and think about this. And I think about that, and I think, it shows that there's something that's working through me. That's not me, right? That's, I mean, it's me, but I mean, I don't think that the impulse to do that is mine alone. I don't think that the gifts that do whatever it is that's happening in those things mine alone. I remember talking to I had a pastor once who's a great guy. Who unfortunately for him got promoted because he was so darn good.
Oh,
and is now the the vicar general of the archdiocese up there in
wow.
Paul, pretty much against his will.
Yeah.
All he ever really wanted to be was a pastor, right? And he was really good at it. But I would compliment him on a homily, and we were kind of friends too, so we'd joke around with each other, and we'd have fun, we'd discuss politics and all sorts of different things. He is a great guy. I don't want to say he is a great guy. And whenever I complimented on that, he would always say, look, anything that that struck you as resonant in my homily, you should thank the Holy Spirit for that. Anything that stunk was me.
Right.
And I feel that same way about the Sunday reflections. It's like, first off, I'm working with some pretty good source material here.
Right.
Just saying, I didn't make this stuff up. It's actually really good stuff, right? And it's true. And it's, but if I have some sort of a special insight, it's because I've been gifted with that. So I kind of, when I started doing that, I kind of realized what it was that he'd been saying to me. Because I always say, oh, Charlie, he's just being humble Charlie, because that was Charlie.
Yeah.
He's a humble guy. But I began to get an appreciation for what it was that he meant by that. And so, yeah.
Well, in something too, seeing you do that, seeing a few more people do that. I think one thing I've written here and there about it as well. And I think part of it was the kind of normal Midwestern reserve about, I don't want to force my views and I don't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable. But I started noticing, especially editing Ricochet, the posts that I was most excited to read and edit were people who were Orthodox Jews, people, someone writing about their background in a completely different religion, this East Asian religion, and then reading your stuff, Catholic, and I don't have that background. And I was like, oh, I think this stuff actually matters. And I think I'd really like to talk more about it, because obviously those kind of issues are more important than politics. And it just seemed like over the past several years that everything's kind of blending together. Now I'm like reading people who dip into philosophy and faith and politics as well, and grand historical trends, because especially with COVID and everything, and it just seems like everything's getting more and more integrated. So I'm really glad to see you start this, and then just a lot of other bloggers talking about these deeper issues. And okay, what are the first principles here? What are we trying to do? Is it just about lowering the marginal tax rate, or is there something more important to life that we're trying to achieve?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you on that. And look, I mean, I go through Ricochet, I go through Stream, which is another platform that is really faith focused. And I also enjoy those posts, mostly because it gets me out of my head. It's just
Right.
reason
That's
to do it
huge.
is at least, trying to reset and focus on what's important. So it's very easy to get caught up in the idols of the day, if you will, if you're
Yeah.
not focused on the fact that, yeah, it's to me, it's a it is a way to reset, right? Get ready for the week ahead with that in mind, because it's really easy to lose perspective otherwise. And I think that that's the reason why people describe faith as a touchstone, because it is, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to get lost without it. And
Right.
and I'm not saying that as a, I want to be careful about this. I'm not saying that to denigrate atheists. I respect them. As long as they respect other people, I respect them, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure though that because I've known it, I was, partners with Allah Pundit for years and years, right? And I know that he's got a moral core. It just doesn't have anything to do with religious faith.
Right.
So you still have to, I think in those instances, and I'm sure that I'm sure atheists do. I wouldn't know personally because I'm not one of them, but I'm sure that they have moral touchstones, right? Or ethical touchstones. And I think Allah Pundit actually, and I know that a lot of people, got really angry with him over the way he expressed himself over the last few years at Hot Air. I think that, but I know that he has those moral and ethical touchstones. So I am not, I want to make that clear. You have to have something. If it's not faith, it has to be something else. But you have to come back to that in order to make sure that you're grounded and that you're not getting lost in a sea of constant stimuli, especially in the social media age.
Oh, exactly. Where there's so many shiny objects to distract you. Well, yeah, I like this better than just a news wrap up. I just wanted to chat with you on here. It's just like, why haven't I had Ed on here like 10 times? So thanks very much for spending time. Where can people find you now with all the projects you're on?
Oh, well, I mean, again, hotair.com is really is where I'm at. In fact, it's pretty much the only place I'm at. In years past, I had columns at different places, and I really enjoyed doing that. And, might not even mind the extra income from time to time, that meant. But but honestly, I feel better about the fact that I'm really only doing the one thing, and I'm not distracted by other commitments. And these days, with being now the managing editor and doing doing a lot of work in support of what I think is a great team at Hot Air. I think that I don't think I have enough hours in the day, man. So you can find me at also find me on Twitter at Ed Morrissey, where I'm thinking about developing the subscription model over there just to see what it's like.
Right.
And there's one guy that signed up for it, and I almost want to write him a check for his $2 this month because I haven't done anything.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat.
If you're listening to me, Homie D, I apologize. I promise I will give you some content here pretty quick.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat with that. And if you heard a clicking noise so far, Both my daughters have wandered in and out, and now Calvin the Wonder Beagle. These are the sounds of domestic bliss. So that's what you get here on this podcast. Thanks so much for being on. Really appreciate you. Will all of your work as well. We'll include all the links in the show notes. Thanks for spending time with me and the listeners.
Hey, John, anytime. It's been great chatting with you.